I was standing in the middle of our family company's conference room when my dad slammed the folder on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "This is why you'll never run anything," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're too soft. Real life will eat you alive." The room froze. 12 employees who had watched me grow up suddenly found their shoes fascinating. Someone coughed awkwardly. My vision blurred at the edges, but I refused to let the tears fall. "Not here. Not in front of everyone." My dad crossed his arms, looking satisfied with himself, like he had just delivered some profound wisdom. Then he turned to my brother and said the words that changed everything: "You're in charge now." My brother, who had been leaning against the wall, straightened up but wouldn't meet my eyes. The staff exchanged glances filled with pity. And my dad? He looked proud, like this public execution was somehow good parenting. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just another one of his mood swings. This was calculated. This was planned. And this was my breaking point. I forced a smile so wide my cheeks hurt. It was either that or cry, and I refused to give him that satisfaction. My brother finally looked at me, guilt written all over his face, but he didn't say a word. He never did. The employees started shuffling papers, pretending to be busy, but I could feel their sympathy radiating across the room like heat. My dad, meanwhile, straightened his tie and looked around the room like a king surveying his kingdom. He had just embarrassed his own daughter in front of people who had known her since she was a child, and he felt powerful because of it. That's when the realization hit me like ice water. This wasn't impulsive. He hadn't just lost his temper. The way he looked at my brother, the way he had positioned himself at the head of the table, the formal tone he used when announcing the change in leadership. He had planned this. Maybe for days, maybe for weeks. He had decided to humiliate me publicly because he thought it would teach me a lesson. Because he thought breaking me down would somehow build me up. I kept that smile frozen on my face as my mind raced. And in that moment, something inside me finally snapped into clarity. My name is Kara. I'm a white American woman in my late 20s, and I had spent the last 8 years of my life dedicated to this company. I came in early. I stayed late. I learned every single department, every process, every client relationship. I knew the vendors by name, remembered their kids' birthdays, understood which suppliers needed patience and which ones needed firm deadlines. I thought that dedication mattered. I thought that kindness made me a good leader. I had watched my dad run this manufacturing business my entire life, and I had seen how his aggressive style burned people out. So I tried something different. When I managed teams, I listened. I created space for people to grow. I celebrated small wins and supported people through challenges. And it worked. My departments had the lowest turnover in the company. Productivity was up. Employee satisfaction scores were the highest they had ever been. But none of that mattered to my dad. To him, kindness was weakness. To him, compassion was coddling. He believed real leaders ruled through fear, through pressure, through dominance. And I was too soft to ever understand what real leadership meant. At least, that's what he told everyone. Growing up, my dad had worshipped one thing above all else: strength. Not the quiet kind that endures. Not the steady kind that supports. The loud, aggressive kind that demands attention. He raised my brother to bark orders and never apologize. He taught him that vulnerability was failure and emotions were for the weak. But me, I was taught to smile and support. To be the cheerful helper in the background. To take notes while the men made decisions. I thought if I worked harder, learned more, proved my value beyond any doubt, things would change. I thought effort would earn respect. For 8 years, I had poured everything into this company. I reorganized the warehouse system and cut costs by 15%. I negotiated better terms with 3 major suppliers. I personally mentored 4 employees who went on to become department heads. But my dad never saw any of that. He saw me offering flexible schedules and called it weakness. He saw me praising good work and called it coddling. He saw me building loyalty and called it being soft. My brother, meanwhile, could show up late, leave early, and make careless decisions, but Dad called it leadership potential. The favoritism had always been obvious. I had just kept hoping it would change. Turns out, nothing would. That huge mistake my dad was talking about. The one that supposedly proved I wasn't fit to lead. I had given a struggling single mom flexible hours instead of firing her. Maria had been with the company for 6 years. She was reliable, skilled, and hardworking. But her childcare situation fell apart when her sister moved out of state. She came to me in tears, certain she was about to lose her job. My dad's solution had been simple: fire her and hire someone without complications. But I saw a different solution. I adjusted her schedule, let her work from home 2 days a week, and gave her project-based deadlines instead of clock watching. And you know what happened? Her productivity actually improved. She was so grateful for the flexibility that she worked harder than ever. She finished projects early. She volunteered for extra assignments. Other employees saw how she was treated and felt more loyal to the company. It was a win for everyone. But my dad didn't care about results. He cared about control. Real leaders don't coddle people, he had said when he found out. You fire the weak ones and replace them with stronger workers. That was his management philosophy in a nutshell. And that was the mistake that apparently disqualified me from ever running this company. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't try to defend myself or change his mind. I simply took off my security badge and set it on the conference table. The small plastic card made a quiet click against the wood. Everyone stared at it like it was a bomb. My brother finally spoke. "Kara, wait." But his voice was weak, and he didn't move to stop me. My dad said nothing. He just watched me with those cold eyes, probably expecting me to break down or plead for another chance. Instead, I picked up my phone and my coffee mug, the one that said "Best Boss" that my team had given me last Christmas. "I'll clean out my office this afternoon," I said calmly. My brother stepped forward and patted my shoulder like I was a child who had just lost a game. "It'll be okay," he whispered. But he didn't mean it. He was just relieved he wasn't the one walking away. As I headed for the door, I paused and looked back at the room one last time. At the employees who had trusted me. At the company I had poured my heart into. At my father, who thought he had just taught me a valuable lesson. What he didn't realize was that I knew this business better than both of them combined. And that knowledge was walking out the door with me. That night, my apartment felt too quiet. I sat on my couch in the dark, replaying every humiliation. Every time he had dismissed my ideas in meetings. Every time he had laughed when I cried as a child. Every time he had compared me unfavorably to my brother. Every time I had swallowed my hurt and tried harder. I thought about the time I had stayed up all night preparing a presentation, only to have him interrupt me after 2 slides and give the floor to my brother. I thought about the family dinners where he bragged about my brother's natural leadership while barely mentioning my accomplishments. I thought about every single time I had made myself smaller, quieter, more agreeable, hoping it would finally be enough. The weight of all those years pressed down on me. For the first time in my life, I let myself feel the full anger of it. Not the polite frustration I usually allowed myself. Real, deep, burning anger. But underneath that anger, something else was growing. Something sharper and clearer. This time, I didn't swallow it. This time, I didn't make excuses for him. This time, I was done trying to earn love from someone who saw kindness as weakness. This time, I was going to prove him wrong. Not by begging for my job back. Not by trying to change his mind. But by showing the world exactly what his version of strength really looked like when it stood alone. The decision came to me clearly, like sun breaking through clouds. No revenge plots. No sabotage. No dramatic confrontations. Just this: I would build something better, and I would do it my way. I would create the kind of workplace I had always wanted to lead. A place where people were treated like humans, not machines. Where kindness was strength, not weakness. Where respect was earned through integrity, not fear. I had spent 8 years learning every aspect of the business. I knew the industry inside and out. I understood what clients needed, what made employees thrive, and what separated good companies from great ones. My dad thought he had stripped me of my power by taking away my title. But he had actually set me free. I didn't need his company. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his permission to prove my worth. I opened my laptop and started making a list of everything I knew, every skill I had developed, every relationship I had built. By midnight, I had the outline of a consulting business. By morning, I had a name, Catalyst Leadership Solutions. Within a week, I had my first client. And people would follow the difference. I started small. My first client was a family-owned bakery struggling with employee turnover. The owner was exhausted, working 16-hour days, constantly hiring and training new staff only to watch them quit within months. I spent 2 days there, just observing and talking to people. The problem was obvious. The owner was a good person who had fallen into all the typical management traps. Treating employees like replaceable parts. Offering minimum wage and expecting maximum loyalty. Never asking for input or showing appreciation. I helped him restructure everything. Fair wages. Predictable schedules. Regular feedback sessions. A clear path for growth and raises. Simple changes, but they transformed the culture completely. Within 3 months, turnover dropped to nearly zero. Productivity soared. The owner called me crying with gratitude. I forgot work could feel good, he said. Word spread faster than I expected. A coffee shop owner called. Then a small accounting firm. Then a boutique gym. Each one had the same story, good people burning out under bad systems. I showed them what compassion-driven leadership looked like. Not weakness. Not coddling. But genuine respect for the humans who made their businesses run. And every single client saw dramatic improvements. My calendar filled up. My bank account grew. And somewhere across town, my dad had no idea what seeds he had planted by pushing me out. 3 months after I left, the messages started. First, it was Amanda from accounting. Hey Cara, hope you're doing well. I miss working with you. Then Marcus from logistics. Things have changed around here since you left. Not in a good way. Then others, one by one. People I had mentored, trained, laughed with. People I had gone to bat for when my dad wanted to cut corners on their benefits. They reached out carefully, like they were afraid of being caught. Your brother is struggling, one message said. He doesn't understand how you kept everything running so smoothly. Another, your dad has been even harder on everyone since you left. 2 people quit this week. They weren't asking me to come back. They were just reaching out, maintaining connection, planting seeds of their own. I responded to each one warmly but professionally. I didn't badmouth my dad or the company. I just listened and offered support. But I also mentioned, casually, that I was building something new. That I was working with small businesses to create better work environments. That I was hiring. The responses were immediate and interested. If you ever need help, I'd love to hear more about what you're doing. Keep me in mind if you expand. My dad, according to these messages, was ignoring every warning sign. Morale was tanking. Clients were complaining. Costs were rising. But he refused to acknowledge any problems. Instead, he just pushed harder, demanded more, blamed everyone around him. And the wheels were starting to come off. My former colleagues weren't exaggerating. Through industry contacts, I started hearing stories. My dad had signed an aggressive expansion deal with a supplier known for unreliable quality. He had cut the customer service staff in half to trim fat. He had doubled mandatory overtime while freezing wages. Every decision was about control and cost-cutting, with no regard for people or long-term consequences. Productivity dropped immediately. When you treat people like disposable resources, they respond accordingly. They do the minimum. They stop caring. They start looking for other jobs. Turnover spiked to levels the company had never seen. Experienced employees who had been there for years started leaving. And training their replacements cost far more than just treating people well in the first place. But my dad didn't see it that way. To him, people were weak. The problem wasn't his leadership, it was their lack of toughness. Everyone's too soft these days, he apparently told the remaining staff. Nobody wants to work hard anymore. He blamed millennials. He blamed the economy. He blamed changing attitudes about work. He blamed everyone except himself. Meanwhile, his management style became even more aggressive. More public criticism. More impossible demands. More late-night emails expecting immediate responses. He thought pressure created diamonds. But all it created was misery and resentment. And in a tight labor market, miserable employees have options. They started taking them. 6 months after I left, 2 senior managers resigned on the same day. Patricia and Omar had been with the company for over a decade. They were the backbone of operations, the people who actually kept things running while my dad made grand pronouncements about leadership. Their resignation letters were polite but firm. They were pursuing opportunities that better aligned with their values. Both of them called me before their final day. "Your dad didn't take it well," Patricia said. "He called us ungrateful. Said we'd never find better jobs. His spiraling," Omar added. "The company's in trouble, Kara. Real trouble." A week later, they both accepted positions with companies I was consulting. They had seen my approach work. They wanted to be part of building something better. When word got around that my former colleagues were thriving in their new positions, more people started reaching out. Not just from my dad's company, but from across the industry. My approach was working. People wanted to work in environments where they were valued. Productivity soared. Morale was high. Clients were happy. And the contrast with my dad's management style became impossible to ignore. My brother called me one evening. His voice was tired in a way I'd never heard before. "Kara, I need to talk to you." For the first time, he sounded uncertain. And I didn't gloat. I just listened. My brother's voice cracked as he explained what was happening. "Everyone's miserable," he said. "I try to do things your way, but Dad overrides every decision. His relentless." He told me about employees crying in bathrooms. About impossible quotas that set people up to fail. About the fear that hung in the air like smoke. "Nobody smiles anymore," he said quietly. "I didn't realize how much of the good culture was because of you. I thought Dad's way was how you were supposed to lead." I stayed quiet, letting him talk. This wasn't about me being right or him being wrong. This was about him finally seeing the truth. "He tells me I'm soft too, now," my brother continued. "Because I don't want to yell at people. Because I think threatening them is wrong. He says I'm turning into you, and he doesn't mean it as a compliment." Something in his voice had changed. The cocky confidence was gone. In its place was exhaustion and something that might have been regret. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "For not standing up for you. For taking the job. For everything." I took a deep breath. "Thank you for saying that. Are things really better where you are?" he asked. "Yes," I said simply. "So much better." We talked for another hour. I didn't offer him a job. I didn't try to recruit him. I just told him the truth about what I'd learned, that real leadership was service, not domination. That strength was empathy, not cruelty. That people followed you because they wanted to, not because they were afraid. When we hung up, I felt something unexpected. Not victory, but sadness. Sadness for all the years we'd wasted under our father's broken philosophy. The industry whispers grew louder. Suppliers started preferring to work with my consulting clients. We paid on time, treated vendors with respect, and built partnerships instead of just extracting value. My dad's company, meanwhile, was burning bridges. Late payments. Aggressive negotiations that squeezed every penny. Broken promises. In business, reputation is everything. And his was deteriorating. I heard through the grapevine that a major supplier had dropped his company entirely. "We don't need clients who treat us like enemies," their representative said. Another vendor nearly doubled their prices for him because they knew he was difficult to work with. The costs of his aggressive style were adding up in ways he'd never anticipated. Meanwhile, my business was growing. What had started as a one-woman consulting operation was becoming a full team. I hired Patricia and Omar full-time. Then 3 more people. We weren't just consulting anymore, we were partnering with businesses long-term, helping them build sustainable, human-centered cultures. A business magazine wrote a profile about my approach. They interviewed clients who gushed about the transformations. They talked about the contrast with old-school, aggressive management styles. They didn't name my dad's company specifically, but people in the industry knew. Everyone knew. My dad heard the rumors. I know because my brother told me he'd come into the office ranting about all this soft nonsense that's ruining business. He couldn't understand why anyone would choose kindness over control. And that blindness was costing him everything. The email came on a Tuesday morning. Professional. Formal. From my dad's assistant. Mr. Brennan requests a meeting to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement of what he'd done. A command, dressed up in corporate language. I stared at the email for a long moment. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely, but curiosity won. I called his assistant back. What kind of collaboration is he interested in? I asked. There was a pause. I think he wants to discuss you returning to the company. Of course he did. Now that things were falling apart, now that his approach was failing, he wanted me to come back and fix everything. Not because he'd learned anything. Not because he changed. But because he needed me. Please tell him thank you for thinking of me, but I'm not interested, I said calmly. I'm very happy with my current work. Another pause. He'll want to speak with you directly. Then he can call me himself, I replied. But my answer won't change. He never called. Instead, he sent another email, this time from his own address. More formal language about exploring opportunities for mutual benefit and leveraging our combined expertise. Still no apology. No acknowledgement. Just veiled commands and assumptions that I would jump at the chance to return. I replied with a single line, I'm not available. His response came within minutes, we need to discuss this like adults. I didn't reply at all. And that silence said everything. My dad tried everything except the one thing that might have mattered, genuine change. He tried rebranding the company with glossy new marketing materials. He tried offering signing bonuses to new hires, only to burn them out within months with his management style. He tried implementing fancy productivity software, as if technology could fix a culture problem. Nothing worked because he was treating symptoms, not the disease. The disease was his leadership. His belief that fear motivated better than respect. His conviction that kindness was weakness. His inability to see employees as humans rather than resources. Every band-aid he applied just made the hemorrhaging more obvious. More employees left. Some retired early. Some found jobs at competitors. Some called me. I didn't recruit them. I didn't need to. They came because word had spread about what we were building. About workplaces where people thrived instead of survived. About leaders who listened instead of commanded. About cultures built on trust instead of fear. For the first time in his life, my dad looked uncertain. My brother told me he'd seen him sitting alone in his office, staring at empty desks through the glass walls. The massive space that used to buzz with activity now felt hollow. He'd spent 30 years building an empire on intimidation. And it was crumbling because nobody wanted to live in fear anymore. The world had changed. People had options. And his entire philosophy was becoming obsolete. But he still couldn't see it. Or wouldn't. Pride is a powerful blindness. The phone call came from a name I recognized immediately, Harrison Tech Solutions, one of my dad's biggest clients. We've decided to make a change, their CEO said. We've heard about your work, and would like to discuss bringing you on. My heart raced. This wasn't just any client. This was a quarter of my dad's revenue. Can I ask why you're making this change? I asked, though I suspected I knew. Honestly, your father's company has become difficult to work with. Missed deadlines, poor communication, high staff turnover that affects consistency. We've been patient, but we need reliability. He paused. And we've heard you understand the industry well. I didn't celebrate on the phone. I stayed professional, scheduled a meeting, thanked him for considering us. But after I hung up, I sat in my office processing what had just happened. This was the moment. The moment my dad would realize that kindness wasn't weakness. That treating people well wasn't coddling. That his aggressive, dominating style wasn't strength, it was driving people away. When Harrison Tech's decision was announced, my dad called me for the first time since I'd left. His voice was cold with rage. "You stole my client." "I didn't steal anyone," I replied calmly. "They called me. They made a business decision." "This is what I taught you," he said bitterly. "This is what happens in the real world. You become the enemy." "No, Dad," I said quietly. "This is what happens when you treat people like they're disposable. Eventually, they dispose of you." He hung up. We haven't spoken since. The collapse happened faster than anyone expected. Within 3 months of losing Harrison Tech, 2 more major clients left. Both cited the same reasons: unreliability, poor communication, and negative experiences with my dad's management team. Employees continued leaving in waves. The talented ones, who had options, left first. Then the experienced ones who were tired of being treated badly. Eventually, even the desperate ones who had nowhere else to go started finding alternatives. Each departure made the situation worse. Remaining employees had to cover more work. Stress increased. Mistakes multiplied. Client satisfaction plummeted further. It was a death spiral, and my dad's response was to grip the controls even tighter. He instituted mandatory weekend hours. He sent emails at midnight expecting immediate responses. He started tracking every minute of everyone's time, turning the workplace into a prison. Partnerships dissolved. Vendors who had worked with the company for decades started refusing new contracts. The business community is small, and word travels fast. People knew what kind of environment he created. They knew how he treated people. And they voted with their decisions. My brother later told me there were days when Dad would sit in his huge corner office, looking out over a mostly empty floor, and he still couldn't understand what had gone wrong. He blamed the economy. He blamed lazy workers. He blamed me. But he never once looked in the mirror and acknowledged that he had created this disaster himself. That every consequence was the direct result of his own arrogance. My brother called me on a Wednesday evening. "I'm leaving," he said without preamble. "I submitted my resignation today." I wasn't surprised, but I was proud of him. How did Dad take it? "He called me soft," my brother said, and I could hear the bitter smile in his voice. "Said I was weak just like you. That I didn't have what it takes for real leadership." "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said firmly. "He's wrong. It took me too long to see it, but I finally understand. You were right all along. About everything." We talked for over an hour. He told me about the final confrontation, how Dad had tried to guilt him into staying, had accused him of betrayal, had said terrible things, designed to wound. "But you know what?" my brother said. "It didn't work. Because I've seen what real leadership looks like now. I've seen your business. I've talked to people who work with you. I know the difference." He paused. I finally stood up to him. Told him his way of leading was destroying everything he'd built. That treating people like enemies guaranteed they'd become enemies. That I wasn't soft, I just wasn't cruel. What did he say? Nothing. He just stared at me like I'd betrayed him. Like choosing basic human decency was somehow a personal attack. My brother sighed. "I don't think he'll ever change, Kara. I don't think he can. He's so committed to his version of strength that he can't see it's actually weakness." "No," I agreed quietly. "He probably won't." "But I did," my brother said. Better late than never, right? The massive office that once buzzed with energy now echoed with emptiness. I heard this from multiple sources: former colleagues who drove past, clients who visited, vendors who dropped off shipments. The parking lot that used to fill up by 8 in the morning now had scattered cars. The break room where people used to gather and laugh sat silent. Conference rooms built for collaboration stood unused. My dad still showed up every day. Still sat at his enormous desk. Still sent emails with the same aggressive tone. But there was almost nobody left to receive them. The company that had employed 45 people at its peak was down to 8. And those 8 were actively job hunting. He had built something impressive over 3 decades. Not through kindness or collaboration, but through sheer force of will and an era when workers had fewer options. But times had changed. People had choices now. And his empire, built on fear and domination, was crumbling because nobody wanted to live under tyranny anymore. The saddest part? He still couldn't admit he'd caused it. He still blamed external factors. The younger generation's weakness, the changing economy, disloyal employees who didn't appreciate what he'd built. Everyone except himself. My brother told me Dad had started talking about selling the company, but there were no buyers. Who would purchase a failing business with a toxic reputation and virtually no staff? The building itself had value, but the company, it had become worthless. And somewhere in his empty office, my dad sat alone with his pride, still convinced he'd done everything right. Meanwhile, my business thrived. What had started as a small consulting operation had grown into a full-scale firm with 15 employees. We'd moved into a beautiful space with natural light, comfortable furniture, and areas designed for both collaboration and quiet focus. Every person on my team had a story similar to mine. People who'd been undervalued, overlooked, or burned out by toxic environments. People who believed work could be different. People who wanted to build something better. We worked with 23 client companies now, ranging from small businesses to mid-sized organizations. Each one experienced measurable improvements, lower turnover, higher productivity, increased profitability. But more than metrics, they experienced cultural transformation. People started enjoying coming to work. Teams collaborated naturally. Innovation increased because people felt safe suggesting ideas. Our approach wasn't complicated. Treat people like humans. Respect their time and lives outside work. Pay fairly. Communicate clearly. Give genuine feedback, both positive and constructive. Create paths for growth. Celebrate successes. Support people through challenges. Simple principles that my dad would have called soft nonsense. Principles that generated better results than his aggressive, dominating style ever had. I built the environment I needed all along. And I slept peacefully every night, knowing that I'd proven something important. Kindness isn't weakness. Empathy isn't naivety. Compassion isn't coddling. They're the foundation of sustainable success. My dad thought he was teaching me a lesson when he humiliated me. Instead, he freed me to prove him completely wrong. I saw him once at a networking event. I almost didn't recognize him. He looked older somehow, smaller, diminished. The aggressive confidence that used to fill every room had faded into something that looked almost like uncertainty. He was standing alone by the refreshment table, holding a glass of wine, watching other people network and laugh. Nobody approached him. People who used to seek him out now gave him a wide berth. His reputation had preceded him. I considered walking over. Part of me wanted to see if he'd acknowledge what had happened, if he'd learned anything from watching his empire collapse. But I didn't. Because I realized I didn't need his acknowledgement. I didn't need his approval or his apology. I didn't need anything from him anymore. Our eyes met across the room for just a moment. Something flickered in his expression, recognition, maybe regret, though I doubted that. More likely just surprise at seeing me there, successful and confident in spaces he used to dominate. He didn't approach me either. Maybe pride kept him away. Maybe shame, though that seemed unlikely. Or maybe, finally, he understood. Not that he'd been wrong, he'd probably never admit that. But that I had succeeded without him. That I had built something real and sustainable using everything he taught me to reject. That his version of strength had isolated him while my supposed weakness had surrounded me with people who genuinely wanted to work together. He looked away first. And I turned back to my conversation with 3 business owners who wanted to learn about building better workplace cultures. I didn't think about him again that night. 6 months later, I heard through industry channels that my dad's company had quietly shuttered. No dramatic announcement. No press release. Just a closed building and disconnected phone lines. His reputation was gone. The network he'd spent decades building had dried up. Not because of me, but because real life eventually rejects tyranny. Because sustainable success requires treating people like humans, not resources. Because fear motivates temporarily but respect motivates forever. He had once told me I wasn't tough enough for real life. That my kindness would get me eaten alive. That I'd never survive without his brand of aggressive leadership. But real life had taught a different lesson. It taught that his style of leadership was outdated, unsustainable, and ultimately self-destructive. It taught that people thrive under supportive leadership and wither under domination. It taught that the world was changing, and his refusal to change with it guaranteed his irrelevance. I didn't celebrate his failure. I felt a strange kind of sadness, actually. Sadness for wasted years and unnecessary pain. Sadness for a man so committed to his flawed philosophy that he destroyed everything he'd built rather than question it. Sadness for what could have been if he'd chosen differently. But I didn't let that sadness define my story. Because my story wasn't about him anymore. It was about building something better. About proving that strength comes in many forms. About creating environments where people flourish instead of just survive. Real life did introduce itself to my dad in the end. And it spoke a language he never cared to learn. The truth settled over me like a comfortable weight. Strength is empathy. Real strength isn't the ability to dominate others or withstand pain without flinching. It's the courage to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, to keep trying even when you're scared. Leadership is service. Real leaders don't command from above. They support from within. They clear obstacles for their teams, celebrate others' successes, and take responsibility when things go wrong. Respect must be earned, not demanded. You can't force people to respect you through fear or intimidation. Respect grows naturally when you treat people with dignity, listen to their ideas, and value their contributions. My dad had spent his entire life believing the opposite. He thought kindness made you a target. He thought empathy made you weak. He thought serving others meant you weren't strong enough to lead. And those beliefs had cost him everything. Not because the world was too soft or people were too weak, but because he was fundamentally wrong about what strength actually means. I had learned this lesson the hard way, through years of trying to please someone who saw compassion as failure. But I had learned it. And now I was teaching it to others, helping business owners understand that treating people well isn't charity, it's strategy. It's how you build something that lasts. My dad thought he was preparing me for a harsh world. Instead, he showed me exactly what kind of leader I didn't want to be. And I never needed his approval to know I'd chosen the right path. I didn't reach out to my dad after his company closed. I didn't gloat or send a message pointing out the irony. I didn't offer help or suggest ways he could have avoided this outcome. I simply lived well. My business continued growing. We expanded to a second office in another city. We hired more people who were excited about building workplaces centered on respect and humanity. We worked with clients who wanted to create sustainable, ethical cultures. Every day, I was surrounded by people who thrived because they were treated like humans. People who brought their best selves to work because they felt valued. People who collaborated naturally because they trusted each other. People who stayed with companies for years because they felt respected. This was my real revenge, though I didn't think of it that way anymore. It wasn't about proving my dad wrong or making him regret his choices. It was about proving myself right. About building the life and business I'd always imagined. About creating the kind of environment I'd needed all along. Sometimes I thought about that moment in the conference room when he announced I was too soft for real life. How humiliated I'd felt. How certain everyone was that I'd failed. But I hadn't failed. I'd been freed. Because real life did introduce itself to my dad in the end. It showed him that cruelty eventually isolates you. That fear is temporary but respect endures. That the world was changing, and kindness was becoming the new strength. And it spoke a language he never cared to learn. But I had. And that made all the difference. If you enjoyed my story, don't forget to like this video. Subscribe for more stories like mine and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your story too.